Okay, let's talk about stress. So, stress is any circumstance. It can be real or perceived, so it doesn't have to necessarily be real, that threatens our well being. And over time, if we have severe stress, what happens is it impairs our ability to really deal with the stress or cope with the stress. Um, so, let's talk about the difference between a stressor and stress. So, a stressor is the thing that causes stress. Okay, so this is the stimulus. It is something that demands adaptation. So something that demands you to change, right? To do something to overcome that stimulus. Stress is the physical and mental changes that occur in response to that stressor. Okay, so the stressor is the stimulus, the stress is the response to the stimulus. Um, there are four components to our stress response. The first and the most important is the cognitive appraisal. Um, First, we need to identify that there is some sort of threat and that we need to figure out a way to cope with that threat. And that's different for everyone, the way that we go about doing that. The next piece is the physiological response. So that's our body's reaction to the stimulus. Our subjective feelings are those emotions that we are feeling in regards to the stressor. And then our behavior is the outward observable actions that are taken because of the stress. So physiological response is like our body's internal response, and the behavior is the outward response. Okay, so stress is not just a stimulus or a response. It's the process by which we appraise, right? That cognitive appraisal, that ability to realize that this is a stressor and then cope with it. Because the same stressful event can be stressful or it can be arousing or causing you to focus, right? So let's think about a math test. If it's both of the in all situations, a math test is a stressful event, right? But you can appraise it, you can think about it in two different ways. You can think about it as a threat. Yikes, ooh, I can't do this math test. Then you're going to have your stressed response. You're distracted. If you see it as a challenge, like, woo, I got to get to work, I got to do this, then you're focused, right? So stress can cause distraction or it can cause that arousal or focus. It just determines how you actually appraise that situation. So when stress is short-lived and taken as a challenge, right? That idea that, oh, I have this big test coming up, I got to focus. These can have positive effects, right? You can get a good grade, you've really focused, you've gotten a lot done. However, if over time that stress becomes, it stays there, it's threatening, now it can become harmful. Again, it's all in how we appraise it and then how long that stressor actually lasts. So there's four different types of stressors we're going to talk about: catastrophic events, life changes, chronic stressors, and daily hassles. I'm going to talk about each of these, and I want you to come up with examples to put in your notes for each of these four different types of stressors. And I want you to think of them in your own life, because remember back to our cognition unit, when you make something meaningful to you, you remember it better. So the first catastrophic events are sudden, unexpected, potentially life-threatening experiences or traumas. So think about an example of that in your own life, or something that you have experienced or you've noticed, something that you'll be able to remember, okay? Life changes or strains. This is when our life circumstances create demands to which people might adjust. For me, a life change would be Rory, right? She was born, so now this is a huge change in my life that now I need to adjust to. So what's something in your life that would be a life change? Catastrophic event for me, I experienced September 11th, right? So I was alive during that time. You guys weren't alive during that time. So what would be a catastrophic event for you? Okay, the next, chronic stressors, those that continue over a long period of time, right? So a job might be a chronic stressor if it's something that you put a lot of work into. For me, the teaching year is my chronic stressor. It lasts over a long period of time. It's a lot to get done. And then our daily hassles. These are those irritations, pressures, annoyances that might not be significant alone, but add up. So for example, for me, a daily hassle is getting Rory up and in her car seat so that we can take Ella to school in the morning. That's a daily hassle, right? So what are some chronic stressors and daily hassles for you? Okay, so let's talk about our stress response system. We've talked about this a little bit when we were back in our bio unit. So this should be review, right? So Cannon, yes, the same Cannon from Cannon and Bard, proposed that our stress response was a fight or flight response where epinephrine and norepinephrine from our adrenal glands just are like flowing out. And what this does is that it increases our heart rate, our respiration rates, it mobilizes our sugar and our fat and it dulls our pain, right? So this is our sympathetic nervous system, right? So all of those things that we've talked about when your sympathetic nervous system gears up for that fight or flight, that's what's happening when we encounter stress. Our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland also respond to stress. And those trigger the outer adrenal glands to secrete cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. And remember, hormones are longer lasting than neurotransmitters. So these are going to be giving you that same kind of sympathetic nervous system reaction over a long period of time. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system are those neurotransmitters that are immediate, right? That's the fast-acting stress response. But then afterwards, now we have our hormones come in that are that slow stress response that are continuing those feelings over a longer period of time, okay? Okay, so general adaptation syndrome is part of our idea of how we respond to stress and our body's reaction to stress. So Hans Selye came up with this idea, and what he said is that stress of any kind has a similar response in our body. We have 3 phases that we go through. The first stage is our alarm reaction. This is our fight or flight response. And it releases those neurotransmitters and hormones, and now we're dealing with that immediate stressful situation. If this stressor persists, meaning if the stimuli continues to be there, then this initial adaptive reaction, so that fight or flight is important, right? It keeps us it keeps us alive. But if that stressor remains, so it's not just like, oh, I thought that was a snake. Oh, it's just a stick. Okay, well, I'm fine now. No, if that stimuli now, oh, there's a snake there. Oh my gosh, it is there. It's, I don't have anywhere to go. It's going to bite me. So if that stressor persists over a longer period of time, now we become distressed. It depletes our resources. It depletes our energy because our body is so worked up, right? We're using all of that fat. We are using the glucose, the energy. Our body is breathing really rapidly. Our heart is pumping really fast. And now we can cause high blood pressure. Our immune system can deteriorate. We can get fatty deposits in our blood vessels. We can get ulcers in our stomach, right? So obviously the snake situation is a shorter period of time, but if this stressor is lasting a pretty long time, now we have issues because our body is in that constant state of arousal. The next is resistance. So if a stressor persists, but it's not so strong that it overwhelms us during stage 1, then we begin to rebound, right? Our body comes back. Outwardly, our body appears to be gaining the advantage, right? So we kind of calm ourselves down, we resist the stressor, we're maybe really focused. Inwardly, on the inside, our body is trying to restore that homeostasis, yet we're still a little bit aroused, right? Because we're still trying to deal with that stress, but it's kind of like coming back down. Resistance only applies to the original stressor, okay? So if we are really stressed about the AP test that's coming up in May, if another thing gets added on top of that, so now not only are you studying for the AP Psych test, but now you're studying for the IB Bio, and you're studying for IB Physics and IB English. Now our defenses are so depleted that we might be unable to respond to that second one. Okay, so our body is so focused on dealing with the AP Psych test that we cannot focus on anything else. And then finally, stage 3 is exhaustion. If resistance fails to relieve the stress, meaning we cannot come down from this stressful event, these symptoms of alarm reappear. This is when a more powerful autonomic nervous system response comes in, the sympathetic nervous system. It overcompensates. The body already has used so much energy to deal with the original stress. And now our body is exhausted. It's depleted. Eventually, if the stressor is large enough, we die because our body has no more to give. Usually there's warning signs of exhaustion. Heart attacks, clogged arteries, excessive colds or flus. This is why, like, come exam time, when you're really, really stressed, you might feel crappy. You might feel like you have a cold or the flu. If you have a headache, those things are your body's way of saying, hey, slow down, calm it down. You need to take a break, okay? Because any stressor, including mental processes like worry, they affect our immune system, right? The human immune system has evolved to deal with short-term stressors. However, if long-term stressors persist, now it's going to break down and it's going to turn on itself. Because there's nothing to really fight off, there's no infection, there's nothing like that the body actually needs to fight off, the body actually starts fighting off itself, right? The body becomes more vulnerable to infection. So this immune system doesn't have anything to break down, so it breaks itself down. And now we are becoming vulnerable to infection and injury, which is why when you're really, really stressed, you get sick more often. So stress has a variety of health-related consequences like we've talked about before, heart attacks, lower immune system, sickness, but what happens is that when we're stressed, healthy choices are harder to do, right? We make unhealthy things. If you're really tired, you're going to drink your coffee. If you are stressed out, you might start to smoke, or you're not getting sleep, or you might turn to fast food because you can't cook a meal. If we persist in this stress, then our stress hormone cortisol causes long-term effects like heart disease, immune suppression, autonomic nervous system effects like high blood pressure or headaches. So these are all consequences that can be related to long-term stress. Okay, let's talk about personality types. I know this is a little weird to put in here, but it is. So personality types, we have type A. This is a person who is competitive, hard driving, impatient, verbally aggressive, and anger prone. These people become stressed out quickly in most cases. I'm type A. I know that about myself. Type B, these are easygoing, relaxed people that seem to deal with stress really easily. They don't get really anxious about anything. They kind of let it fly off their back. This is my husband. My husband and I are completely different in how we deal with stress. And that's kind of what this next part comes in. When we're alleviating stress, there's two different ways that we can go about coping with the stress. The first is problem-focused coping. This is, we are going to change events in our life that cause the stress. Therefore, we're not going to have the stress in the future. For example, your car keeps breaking down, causing you to stress, so you're going to buy a new car. I call this man coping because men always come in and they want to fix the situation, right? Like, oh, you're stressed about that? Well, what are you going to do about it to fix it, right? Like sometimes women, and I'm not saying all women, but me, I just want to focus on my emotions, right? Like, I'm like, I know it. This is a terrible situation. I just want to cry about it. And we just, deal with our own emotional needs. Sometimes you just want to vent, or sometimes you just want to talk about it. That's emotion-focused coping. You break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, which causes you stress, so you go and vent to your friends, right? So problem-focused, you're going to fix the situation that caused the stress. Emotion-focused, you're going to deal with your own emotions because you know you can't fix the situation.